Hey beautiful, welcome to Dr. Sarah's Café. This is your weekly refill where we take our time to savor the flavor of the week, which is a unique specialty blend of astrology, tarot, oracle cards, some creativity and poetry, as well as intuition. This week, the flavor of the week is brought to us by one of the lesser known astrology aspects, our planets, rather, our celestial bodies, rather, and it is a comet known as Chiron, a comet known as Chiron. So our flavor is Chiron is key. So the symbol or the glyph of Chiron is this little K with the circle at the bottom, the K with the circle. And every time I see the glyph of Chiron, I think of a key. Chiron is doing its thing in the sky. We'll talk about it in just a second. But this, because I've already done the tarot reading, and so I also know in advance, and also I put together the slides for this refill, that this is about confidence. This is about taking the pain and turning it into power. Okay, so let's jump in. Let's dive in. We'll start with the earlier aspects. We don't get to Chiron till later in the week, but we have December 24th, Christmas Eve, for those of you who celebrate, Jupiter in Gemini squaring Saturn in Pisces. So be careful around Christmas time. There's a lot of squares and oppositions, which are notoriously difficult transits, are tough, tense transits, a lot of tension going around this holiday season. Starting with the Christmas Eve, Jupiter squaring Saturn in Pisces. So a square is already a tense aspect, right? 90-degree angles, like T-boning someone. Things are sort of at odds, right? There's misalignment sometimes. And we have opposite energies. We have Jupiter, which wants to expand everything and say, yes, let's go have fun. And we have Saturn, which often constricts, withholds, limits, puts boundaries around that expansion that Jupiter wants to do. And so these are particularly disparate energies in a lot of ways, okay? While Jupiter also has stereotypically known as the Santa Claus, the granddaddy of the zodiac, Saturn is often stereotyped as the disciplinarian, the really strict school teacher or principal, right? And so they already have that like yin yang, that strict mother with the rebellious teen aspect to them, and yet they're also squaring. They've squared each other a few times earlier this year. So I didn't think to get the dates of the previous squares, but because they both went retrograde, they're squaring each other again. But you can probably Google those dates and just see what it felt like around that time, like what tensions or conversations, what seeming limitations or things maybe not going according to plan. Maybe you wanted to go all out and you had to like scale back in some way. I'm also getting that there's conflict, it could be between generations, but it's really a difference in ideologies. Okay, so something about ideologies could be at play here with Jupiter being that planet of belief systems, religious practices, religious institutions, and Saturn being not anti-religious, but just a lot more practical, grounded, strict, and in that way, very patriarchal and institutional in a lot of ways, right? So in that sense, they correspond to each other, right? Because Jupiter also rules things like capitalism, excess. Yeah. So then the 26th, the day after Christmas, we have Mercury doing its thing. One, it's opposing Jupiter and Gemini. So again, we have squares and oppositions, notoriously difficult. I mentioned at length the opposition between Jupiter and Mercury this year in the Jupiter retrograde video, which I'll be sure to link to in the description box. I highly recommend watching it. Jupiter will still be retrograde until February 4th of 2025. And it could also give you insights into how to navigate or leverage this opposition, this second, I think this is the third and final opposition between Mercury and Jupiter during this transit. But just to summarize for people who haven't seen that yet, this is again the difference between wanting to go big versus wanting to go deep, right? Wanting to go wide versus wanting to go deep. So Mercury is like the microscope, looking at all the fine details, and Jupiter is like the telescope, looking out at the vast horizons and distant lands, right? Looking out at the sky and the cosmos. Mercury is also the details, the trees. Jupiter is the big picture and the forest, right? So they're opposing each other. That's, again, that opposition in ideology, that opposing perspective. And how do you find that balance? If you find it's challenging to find that balance, reflect on, are you more Mercury, where you want to dig deep and look at small details, or are you more Jupiter, where you want to sort of expand? Now, one of the things I mentioned in that video too is that because Mercury is in Jupiter's home and Jupiter is in Mercury's home, that I think this will help them understand each other a little bit better. So they're not just like out with no context having an argument. They are having this debate or this tense conversation, but they are able to witness or kind of walk a mile in each other's shoes and say, I kind of get where you're coming from because I literally am where you are coming from. And then that same day, Mercury will be squaring Saturn. Okay, so Saturn here can be the mitigator. This is all things that I'm thinking about on the spot. This did not come to me when I first made these slides several weeks ago. And because Saturn is so disciplined, so sober-minded, and practical, pragmatic, and very mature, grounded, wise, keeps time, it can sort of, and Mercury and Jupiter are more childlike, playful, jovial, kind of more so wanting to get carried away with themselves. So this Saturn square could actually check a lot of that excess energy. The Saturn square might be uncomfortable, it might be tense, it might be difficult, it might feel harsh and unfair, it might feel uncomfortable, it might feel like those sandpaper moments, like I like to say, but I think it's also, with Saturn at play, helping to keep certain things in check. Maybe. Now, another way this could play out is that Saturn is just the despot, right? Like the dictator. So you have to be careful with all energies always, but that's one potential use of this, right? Like if you find yourself in a dynamic that sounds like what I'm talking about, you can leverage that Saturn energy to mitigate the opposition between Jupiter and Mercury and say, hey, you both have valid points, and here's where you can meet in the middle. You don't want to go to the extreme with your Jupiter energy. You don't want to go to the extreme with your Mercury energy. So what if you both looked at the essence of what you're trying to say, and you might find there's a lot more overlap than you think, or a lot more cohesion and synthesis than you think. Fingers crossed. And then the next day, December 27th, we have yet another square, this time with Venus and Aquarius squaring Uranus and Taurus. This could be, so a lot of times Uranus is shocks and surprises, and Venus is known for the romantic things, the lovely things, the nice things. So what I say with this is just be careful with your heart, and don't, because it's already unexpected, I would say your plans might not go according to plan. So if you plan to redecorate, it might not go according to plan with this Uranus square. If you plan to surprise your crush, it might not go according to plan because Uranus is like shocks and surprises, and you don't get to control or dictate the surprise. So you might think oh, it's a Uranus energy, I'm going to surprise this person, but Uranus will end up surprising you. Okay. So a lot of astrologers advise saving your surprises for when Uranus is not involved, because two negatives make a positive, they say. So it could kind of cancel out the intention, the good intention that you have for whatever you're planning. And then December 29th, we get to Chiron. we get to Chiron. Chiron goes direct in the sign of Aries. Chiron goes direct in the sign of Aries. What you need to know about Chiron is that it is a comet. It is named after one of the Greek gods, I believe, who had been wounded, and the wound never healed. And so he became a constellation or something like that, right? You might know the mythology even better than me. So he's known as the wounded healer. The wounded healer, the person who will never be able to heal their own wounds, but in their understanding of the woundedness, they're able to heal other people. They're able to provide healing because of that wound to others around them who have suffered similar wounds. Chiron is that very vulnerable place. Chiron is often an area of our life where we feel like we've always felt shame. Chiron is that part of our identity where we struggle to feel like we're good enough, you know, where we're often wanting to hide or cover up or conceal that part of us because we think people won't like us or love us if they knew that or saw that side of us. And what's interesting to me, the timing of this, the synchronicity of it all, is that I was pulling oracle cards for myself in between recordings. So not for you all here on YouTube, just for me and myself in between recordings. And I got for myself Nana Baluku and Seasons from Abiola Abrams's African Goddess Rising deck. And the bottom of the deck was Wounded Healer. Sekhmet and Wounded Healer. Now I knew Wounded Healer was Chiron, but I hadn't reviewed the slides for this week yet. So I didn't know that the flavor of the week was Chiron is key. So to get to see this wounded healer energy show up in this space as I'm about to record about Chiron being key feels like underscore, highlight, emphasize, asterisk, circle around the fact that Chiron is indeed key. And more specifically, not just the wound of Chiron, but the healing capacity of Chiron. And so you have to know and understand that the things that have hurt you could very well empower you to help someone else. And with all these squares and oppositions, there could be a lot of hurt feelings this week. I'm just going to be honest. There could be a lot of tension. Doesn't have to be. Not everyone is going to experience the week this way. But for those of you where it's difficult, the holidays are notoriously difficult for a lot of people. Just know that you're not less than because you have this hurt or this wound or you feel this sense of shame, but that actually gives you greater capacity to be there when others need that reassurance and that healing. And you can also get that from others as well, right? So in the image here, I have Chiron, the glyph of Chiron. I turned it over and paired it with a lock. There's something that we can open. And this might even be opening up about what has hurt us, opening up about things that we have felt ashamed of, and taking our power back to take ownership of our story, taking ownership of our narrative and saying, I don't have to feel shame around this thing. It doesn't mean I have to do a CNN op-ed about it, but I don't have to hide it because I'm ashamed of it, right? You know, it's true. They say not everyone deserves to hear your story, right? You know what I mean? So judgment and discernment on your part. But I think that's different from feeling like you can't tell your story because it's going to mean something shameful or disgraceful about you. Chiron is also the energy of feeling like you never fit in, right? Feeling like people just don't get you. Depending on where Chiron is in your birth chart, it'll tell you the thing that you feel most wounded about. And also the area where you can help others heal in that way. Okay. So getting through these squares and oppositions, think about the energy of the wounded healer. Like, yes, I have been through a similar situation. And I know it's difficult. I know it's hard. I know we're not happy in this dynamic. But here's what I learned in my experience. Here's the wisdom I've gleaned in my overcoming, in my healing journey, right? In this way. Is there anything else I wanted to say? Chiron. Okay. The other things that related to Chiron and this idea of confidence and not letting that sense of shame or embarrassment or feeling like you have to hide and not be your true authentic self because you think people will reject you has to do with the tarot and the oracle card. So we got the Knight of Wands. And as I mentioned, I've already done the Tuesday tarot reading for this. So be sure to watch that when it comes out on Tuesday, where I unpack this energy even further. But just again, in preparing for this refill today, I read for the Knight of Wands, and the relevant part to me is that the author, Golden Black Cat Tarot, Helena de Almeida, is the author. She says, "It is time for you or someone to show who you really are, to put the mask aside. Sometimes the brightness, aka the smiling face, the laughter, overshadows the truth, which can be a dangerous illusion for those involved." So this is the depiction, right, of the Knight of Wands with a mask, which is unusual. It's unique to this deck. I've never seen any other tarot deck where the Knight of Wands is wearing a mask. So I think it feels like this author was divinely guided, had some psychic assistance in writing this deck and creating these cards. But it tracks as well. So the sort of bravado, the sort of bombastic ego energy, people who seem to be very arrogant, are trying to perform, trying to compensate, I think is another way for it, for where we feel small, for where we feel that not enoughness. Yeah. But on the other side of this, though, the Knight of Wands is a very charismatic, very action-oriented sign. So I wonder if some of us this week realize that we have not stepped fully into our lives because of that sense of shame. If we've been holding back on taking action on something, pursuing a passion, or buying that plane ticket to a foreign country, or applying for that new job, or leaving that relationship, or asking that person on a date, because of our Chiron wounding, because we still struggle to feel seen, we still struggle to think that we're good enough in some way, we still struggle with that vulnerability, that really tender spot, right? If they knew this about me, they wouldn't want to be my friend anymore, that kind of thing. And that has maybe stopped some of us from getting into this Knight of Wands energy where we can take action and pursue our passions and live life with zest, right? And joyfulness and energy and vitality, because we're afraid that people might find out the truth about us. And Lauryn Hill, and her Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, no, not the Miseducation. Let's run that back. In her MTV2 Unplugged album/video, which really got me through my high school years, speaking of Chiron and the wounded healer, she says, if you give yourself up, no one can blackmail you in anything. If you give yourself up, no one can blackmail you in anything. And she talks about being held hostage to the secrets that we're trying to keep, being held hostage to the parts of our personality, the parts of our history, the parts of our story that we don't want anyone to find out. And that secrecy becomes a prison that stops us from being able to just jump feet first, head first into life, right? Now, the Oracle card we have is very similar, actually. It's from the same element of fire. So the Knight of Wands is fire. And we also, in this instance for our Oracle card, have the Mother of Fire, which is the Queen of Wands. So it's almost like mother-child energy as well. The Mother of Fire is a very confident person. So it's like the opposite of that Chiron energy, where you don't let shame and fear and the fear of vulnerability hold you back. And oftentimes, maybe the Mother of Fire is so emboldened because she knows what she survived. She knows what she's been through, right? She knows that her wounds are part of her purpose, perhaps, right? I'm going to read from the guidebook for this as well. Oh, also, Mother of Fire, this oracle card is shine and rise. You see that? Shine and rise. So what I'm saying is that we can't let our Chiron fears, our Chiron hurts, our Chiron wounds stop us from shining and rising and being all of our magnificent, glorious selves, okay? The author says, Abiola Abrams, Secrets of the Ancestors deck, which was a gift from one of our viewers. Yes, own it all. The good, the bad, and the potentially ugly. So that first sentence is saying, don't be ashamed of your story, whatever it is. Don't be ashamed of the mistakes you've made. Don't be ashamed that you've been ashamed. All the things. She says, yes, own it all. The good, the bad, and the potentially ugly. Own your power. Living life by your own rules is not easy. It's not easy, but this is what is necessary for you. Let the haters hate. Let the haters hate. You enjoy the attention. You have the power of influence. Use it wisely. You got next. Many are warmed by the bright light you shine. This makes you a magnet and social butterfly when you choose to be. Use your powers of influence for good. This line, the sentence, many are warmed by the bright light you shine, makes me think of that wounded healer energy. So somebody, was it Rumi, said the wound is where the light gets in? I don't know, something like that. Yeah, so don't underestimate that it's not just your highlight reel that makes you special. It's not just the highlight reel that makes you powerful. It's also like all the things that we try to hide from social media. That's part of what makes you special. It's part of your story. And even though it might not be aesthetically pleasing or trendy or cutesy or demure, it might be very rugged, rough and tumble, roughshod, ugly. It is still part of your power. It's part of what makes you shine. Ancestral memory. The mother of fire shows up as mitochondrial Eve, whom science says is the first woman and most recent common ancestor for all living humans. Our Eve is from the San peoples of Southern Africa. Ancestral medicine. Kaboom! Guess who stepped in the room? I feel like, I got a hoodie on. I gotta say that again. Kaboom! Guess who stepped in the room? All right. You have inherited your ancestors' passion, an enthusiastic penchant for standing out. Shadow aspect. Beware of jealousy, deceit, betrayal. Or are you the one being shady? Stop trying to preserve your image. Life is too short to be shallow. Stop trying to preserve your image. So some of you are hiding those shameful things, the mistakes from your past, where you've fallen, where you have failed, all those, anything that you might be trying to hide or be ashamed of. And part of it is the shame, but it's also ego and wanting people to perceive you a certain way and being afraid that they're going to stop perceiving you as the intelligent, beautiful, witty, successful person that we present on social media if you are open and honest about these other parts of you. Tarot correspondence, Queen of Wands, and declaration, my confidence is magnetic. My confidence is magnetic. Yes. Okay. The Pastry and Poetry comes from someone I think is a quite Queen of Wands herself, quite Mother of Fire, shining and rising, Michelle Obama. Dun, dun, dun. Michelle Obama. Mrs. Obama was born January 17th, so she is a Capricorn. Happy birthday, Capricorns. Y'all know I like to feature people during the season that we're in. And so this poem is going to be a quote from one of her recent memoirs, The Light We Carry. I remember the oracle card talked about your light shining through, okay? The light you carry, it's shining forth. And our pastry is chocolate muffins. I feel like I've done chocolate muffins frequently in the past several weeks. But if you've ever had a warm chocolate muffin that's soft and moist, honey, you understand. We get you. We get you. Okay. Michelle Obama, the light we carry. There's no way to eliminate the ache of being human, but I do think we can diminish it. This starts when we challenge ourselves to become less afraid to share, more ready to listen. When the wholeness of your story adds to the wholeness of mine, I see a little of you, you see a little of me. We can't know all of it, but we're better off as familiars. I'm going to read that again since it's so short. I think it speaks to the vulnerability of Chiron this week. And yeah, I think with these oppositions and squares, if there's arguments, if there's tension, if there's fighting, or just troublesome times of any sort, any scale, in any area of life, I think Chiron is the key, and we can use Michelle Obama's advice here to leverage Chiron to say, you know, I know you're shouting at me in this moment, but I see the wound that is coming from, and it's speaking directly to my wound, which is why this moment feels so difficult, because your wound is speaking to my wound. And none of us in this moment, we haven't acknowledged that. Specifically, your wound that has gone untended to is speaking to my wound that has gone untended to for far too long. And we find ourselves in this moment with our wounds exposed, and we don't know how to react. So sometimes allowing the expression of the wound is the way through the conflict. There's no way to eliminate the ache of being human, but I do think we can diminish it. This starts when we challenge ourselves to become less afraid to share, more ready to listen. When the wholeness of your story adds to the wholeness of mine, I see a little of you, you see a little of me. We can't know it all, but we're better off as familiars. All right, hour to go. Our takeaway. What actions do I feel timid about? That could be a clue to your Chiron. What do you feel timid about? Specifically, what have you often felt timid about? What do you frequently feel timid about? What have you felt timid about since childhood? And what actions feel bold to me? It's also a clue and a key to your liberation, to you shining and rising, to you stepping into all the fullness of your magnificent, glorious life, or the potential that you are working towards. What actions feel bold to me? And maybe it's time to take those bold actions, my dear. And with that, I hope that this has helped you in some way to refill your spiritual cup. Be sure to watch the Tuesday tarot reading when it comes out, and I hope to see you in another video. Take care.